And now we're going to take a look at division and democracy in France. So our learning objectives here are to describe the changes in France between 1814 and 1914. France under Napoleon III. After the Revolution of 1848, Napoleon III, nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, rose to power and set up the Second Republic. The bourgeoisie saw him as a strong leader who would restore order. His promise to end poverty appealed to the lower classes, and people of all classes were attracted by his name. After all, they remembered the glory times under his uncle Napoleon. But unlike his uncle, he brought France neither glory nor an empire. On the surface, the Second Empire looked like a constitutional monarchy, but in fact, Napoleon III ruled almost as a dictator. The assembly was elected by universal male suffrage, but appointed officials managed the elections so supporters of the emperor would win. Debate was limited, and the newspapers faced strict censorship. By the 1860s, the emperor began to ease controls and issued a new constitution on the eve of the disastrous war with Prussia. Like most of Europe, France prospered at mid-century. Napoleon III promoted investment in industry and large-scale building projects like railroads. He also promoted the urban renewal of Paris. During this period, Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French entrepreneur, organized the building of the Suez Canal in Egypt to link the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Napoleon III's biggest disasters were in foreign affairs. In the 1860s, he tried to place Maximilian, a Habsburg prince, on the throne of Mexico. He hoped to make Mexico into a French satellite. After a large-scale investment of troops, it failed. The U.S. protested, and the Mexican patriots resisted. They eventually executed Maximilian. Napoleon III's successes were almost as costly as his failures. He helped Italy win independence from Austria, but Italy turned into a new rival on its border. And then we, of course, had the disastrous war with Prussia. Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck lured Napoleon into war. And of course, we previously looked at that in another chapter where Bismarck translated a telegram leaving out certain parts that made it appear that the German Kaiser had insulted a German official. And as such, a furious Napoleon declared war on Prussia. The Franco-Prussian War was a disaster for France. Following the capture of Napoleon III, German forces encircled the city of Paris. After 4 months of siege by the Prussians, Parisians were reduced to catching rats and killing circus animals for food. At the news of Napoleon III's capture, Republicans in Paris declared an end to the Second Empire. They set up a provisional or temporary government, and it soon evolved into France's Third Republic. In 1871, the newly elected National Assembly accepted a harsh peace with Germany. France had to surrender the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine and pay a huge sum of money to Germany, and they were eager to avenge their loss. In 1871, an uprising broke out, and the rebels set up the Paris Commune. Like the radicals during the French Revolution, its goal was to save the Republic from the Royalists. The radicals refused to accept the peace signed with Germany. The National Assembly demanded the Paris Commune disband, but they refused. A civil war broke out. Eventually, the National Assembly prevailed, but the conflict left bitter division. The Third Republic lasted for 70 years. The new republic had a two-house legislature. The lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, was very powerful and was elected by universal male suffrage. Together with the Senate, it elected the president, who had little power and was mostly just a figurehead. Real power was in the hands of the premier, or prime minister. France had many political parties. With so many parties, no single party could win a majority in the legislature, and in order to govern, politicians had to form coalitions, or alliances of various parties. Coalition governments are often unstable, and France was no exception, as more than 50 coalition governments fell apart in the first 10 years of the Republic. Then in 1894, a high-ranking army officer named Alfred Dreyfus was accused of spying for Germany. At his trial, neither he nor his lawyer were allowed to see the evidence against him. The injustice was the result of anti-Semitism, or hatred of Jews. He was convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Later evidence pointed to another officer, Ferdinand Esterhazy, but the army refused to grant Dreyfus a new trial. The Dreyfus affair scarred French politics and society for decades. The pogroms of Russia and the Dreyfus affair were two things that stirred Theodor Herzl, a Hungarian Jewish journalist living in France, to call for Jews to form their own separate state, where they could have rights that were otherwise denied to them in European countries. Herzl helped to launch modern Zionism, a movement devoted to rebuilding a Jewish state in Palestine. Many Jews had kept this dream alive since the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. In 1897, Herzl organized the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. France achieved serious reforms in the early 1900s. Like Britain, France passed laws regulating wages, hours, safety conditions for workers. It set up a system for free public schools. The French government also took measures to separate church and state, including closing religious schools. Women began to push for greater rights in the late 1800s and made some small gains, but they still were denied the vote until after World War II.